Good evening. Welcome to the 43rd Mill Valley Film Festival closing night. Whew. My name is Mark Fishkin. I am the founder and director of the Mill Valley Film Festival.
And I'm Zoe Elton, director of programming for the Mill Valley Film Festival. And we've made it to the end of this crazy year at the drive-in. Who'd have thunk it?
Yes, made it by the skin of our teeth, as they say. We have an extraordinary film for you tonight. Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? It's a fabulous film directed by Frank Marshall and produced by Frank Marshall and Nigel Sinclair, who you will be seeing momentarily.
And what better way to close out the drive-in than the Bee Gees? I mean, we're all staying alive. And I just want to say, though, if you feel inspired to get up and dance, please stay inside your cars.
And you know, it's also appropriate because I can remember every decade or less than a decade, when a wonderful Bee Gees film would come out, I'd be in my car and I'd be turning up the radio as soon as it went on. I am very excited about sharing this film with you today.
It's the perfect way to wrap up the festival. Enjoy it.
It is, Zoe. Congratulations to you, Zoe. Congratulations to our board. And of course, a huge congratulations to our incredible staff, sponsors, donors, members, and everybody who made this impossible feat possible. Thank you. Welcome to closing night of the 43rd Mill Valley Film Festival. We are so excited to be showing tonight the premiere of the Bee Gees, How to Mend a Broken Heart. And with us this evening, we have Frank Marshall, the director, and Nigel Sinclair, the producer. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Both of you have been prolific filmmakers. I can't even really recount how many titles each of you have produced, and I know, Frank, you've directed 14 films, including The Right to Play, the story of Johan Olin Koss, which we showed at the Mill Valley Film Festival a few years ago. So it's a pleasure to welcome you back and to welcome you, Nigel, to this conversation and to the Mill Valley Film Festival. The Bee Gees have had one of the most amazing careers of any rock band you can imagine. But they've almost had as many comebacks as any famous rock band as well. And I'm wondering if each of you, maybe we can start with you, Frank, could talk about this resilience that they had and this amazing way, and I guess we call it a pivot this year especially, to finding another way to create and excel and to keep and grow their audience.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, Mark, hello, everybody, all my friends there in the Bay Area. Sorry we can't be there, but excited to have the film showing tonight, especially since it's closing night. So I hope you enjoy it. But it's an interesting question that we really, this has been an amazing 3-year journey for us. And I have to say that when I started this journey, I really wanted to focus on not just the musicality of what they did, but the family aspect, because I really believe that one of the reasons that they stayed together all this time through the ups and downs was because they were a family. Now, I know there's a lot of other family bands, but this one they were really unique. And I think they grew up together. And early in their childhood, they handled a lot of hurdles and just kept going forward. And it was that staying together and going forward that I really think was the key to them overcoming all these challenges and adapting to these different periods that they had to go through.
Nigel, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think that the most important thing, as Frank said, is the family structure, which meant that, for example, when they broke up, if a band breaks up, they need to have a meeting about getting back together. Because the Bee Gees family continue to function as a family. And I believe the Jonas Brothers, as we learned in the film, are a bit like this. They didn't actually need to have a meeting about it. They just needed to talk about it over dinner because the parents banged them around the head and said, "You're coming to Christmas dinner," quite literally. And that's there. But I think the second thing was, songwriting was a calling for them. And the worst crisis they had, which was in 1973 or 4, when they're really at the bottom in the north of England playing in a club, and they were drunk and having fights outside the theatre. And they sat down and said, what are we going to give up? And they sort of looked at each other, despite, the rage that only brothers can have, and said, "No, we're going back." And I think that feeling of impelling, they felt impelled to never give up.
It's amazing. Speaking of the family, there's been a number of bands, and many of them with families, that have this unique sound, and including the Beach Boys with their 3-part harmony as well. But there seems to be something really special about that surfaces rarely, but consistently enough that, I wonder what's really behind this. Is it the fact that their voices happen to be so beautiful? I know somebody mentioned, I believe in the film, that, Robin's is like almost a gift from God. And all of their voices are incredible. But there seems to be like a special, almost spiritual element that happens with bands like the Bee Gees in particular. I know that's maybe a little far-fetched in some way to think it is a spiritual aspect, but do you have thoughts about that as well?
Well, I would kind of agree with that, Mark. I grew up in a musical family, and, my dad was a guitar player and very musical, and I didn't get his gift for, I could play rhythm guitar, but I'm terrible at lead, and he could write for orchestras and things. And so there are different gifts, I think, that you get, but when you grow up in a musical household, you absorb all the time that music that's coming your way. And I know their father was big. He was in a big band, and they had music playing all the time. And as you see in the movie, they were very influenced by the Mills Brothers, the Everly Brothers, and the brothers singing. And, I was really curious, and I asked Barry several times, well, how did you guys learn harmony? Well, they didn't. And that's the most amazing thing. They never went to music school or studied harmonies or anything. They just did it. And I think he even says in the movie, Robin would do one thing, and Maurice would just chime in at another octave or with the harmony. So it was very natural that they picked up this 3-part harmony. It was very unusual. And that's kind of a gift, I think. And certainly they had that gift, and who knows where it comes from.
I think as we investigated this in the film, we decided to survey brother bands. And what we found was that no sibling band survives extreme fame, superstar fame past 30. If you go through the bands in your mind, you'll find they're all the same. Many of them make it to 30, but they blow apart. And we sort of were fascinated by the question we touched on, but didn't completely answer in the film, which is why are the Bee Gees the only band that 50 years later, for all their ups and downs, they are still playing great records together in the 90s, 40 years on. And I think we in the film, Nick Jonas talks about, there's something about where you come into the world from the same place, meaning from your mother's womb, that is something. I think everybody can understand that. And there may be something just biological about the DNA, your vocal cords having some kind of magic synchrony, as I think Ron was, Frank was suggesting. And I think in the end, somehow or other, the Bee Gees, they had a calling. From when they were 6 and 9, they had a calling to write songs, and that was bigger than any of the fights between them, and there were fights that pushed them apart. And it overcame everything. And that's that hopefully that comes across in the film, and we that was our big discovery, actually.
Yeah, and I could tell a little story about Lulu that's not in the movie. It's one of those choices we had to make, but she remembers they had, there's that time when they all matured and they sort of grew up and decided, well, we want to have our own lives and we want to go our own way. And they got married. And she remembers that they did get back together when Robin and Barry got back together, that Barry was actually in the studio working on a song, and Robin walked in, and they hadn't seen each other in months. And he just chimed in with a chorus and a lyric. And it was like incredibly natural. And that doesn't happen ever.
That's amazing. I can't help but wonder if the twins were doing a harmony in the womb. But I do remember something about it that, well, more pointed, that they did their recording in the studios, which is more spontaneous in a sense. And they must have enjoyed that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wrote their songs on the spot. You know, there's that great line in the movie where Chris Martin says, you know, you don't know where it comes from. You know, it's like magic out there that's kind of running everything. And, you know, for surfers, they just look for the wave and the wave comes. And that's kind of how I think they operated. I was always curious. The songwriters that I know, I say, well, where'd you get that idea? They don't know. They come out of somewhere and they just receive the songs. They don't really write them. And the three of them together was this magic combination.
And Nigel, you mentioned, you mentioned, Frank, that your family was very involved in music, and yours as well, Nigel, and both of you have made a lot of different films. Frank, The Last Waltz, Sinatra, Laurel Canyon, which is in the festival, Docklands, and Nigel, the Foo Fighters. You worked with the Beatles and the Who and George Harrison. Is this love of film and making films about music directly related to your family? Or do you play as well, or strum?
I play the guitar, but not nearly as well. Frank is a proper guitarist. I pretend to play the guitar, and I have a lot of expensive guitars, which is my way of making up for it. But I think there's something about working with music. I'm not a musician. I don't work in the music business, which is just completely lyrical. You know, when you go on these journeys, discover something, and you eventually discover what we discovered about the Bee Gees, which we're just touching on now, this amazing artistic collective, which happens to be made up of three natural brothers, with whom their natural brotherhood is part of the story, and they're just their God-given genius as another. And as you start unpacking that, I mean, I think we found, Frank and I and our fellow producers, Mark Monroe and Jeannie Fester, we sort of felt like you get these gifts working on these projects. And not that you don't in non-musical subjects, but there's something about the music of it. When that song that Frank was talking about that they wrote was called Run to Me. And at the end of the film, at the very end of the film, we had another idea for the end. Frank and I were sitting and he said, I want you to leave me alone in the edit room just for a little bit, Nigel, because, you know, directors like to get rid of their producers. So that's important. Off I go. And I come back in there, and Frank has picked that moment in Run to Me from the live Las Vegas One Night Only Live, where Barry's playing Run to Me, and Robin walks up to the microphone. And remember, they're on one mic, so they can't fake this. This is live. There's no Pro Tools. And he's warming himself up with his voice and just out of mic range. And he comes in, Run to Me. That's what he actually sang in Lulu's story. And I just looked at it. We all started to cry. Now, that sort of discovery in music is unbeatable, and you get paid going to work to do it as well.
Yeah, I don't think the full appreciation of what they have done has really surfaced, even after all these years and the death of the brothers. It's really a testament to them and a benefit to everybody to bring this up. I would listen to their music on the radio and my feet would be moving and I'd turn the radio up. But you know, in some respects, you know, the Beatles would overshadow or the Stones or whatever, but that certainly was not the case. And the one element that I think a lot of people don't recognize is what amazing songwriters they were. I think they wrote over 1,000 songs, and not just for themselves, but for Barbra Streisand and others. And it's just an amazing, that would have been enough for any one person, let alone everything else that they have done, from the different genres that they sang in, to their beautiful voices. I think they're one of the greatest songwriters in the modern rock and roll history.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with that, because a lot of people just know them from Saturday Night Fever, which would be enough. You know, they had 5 #1 singles off that one album, which wasn't even written for the movie. They were writing those songs for another album, and they fit in perfectly into the movie. But, you know, what other group, except for maybe the Beatles, has gone across 5 decades? And I think what's interesting is a lot of people only know them from Saturday Night Fever on. They don't realize what they did before, or they don't realize that those songs, they don't realize that those songs that, like Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, that's a Bee Gees song. I mean, this vast amount of music that they covered is really extraordinary.
I think just to support that, I think the way that Frank wanted to take this film was it was a story of songwriters, 3 brothers who were songwriters. That their day job for them was writing songs and composing. They learned about harmony when they were 6 and 9, just playing around as brothers listening to the radio, a famous story. They didn't know the word harmony, and as Frank said, they didn't have any musical knowledge whatsoever. And the rest of it, you know, the going out and being a band, the recording music, was all a way for them to bring their songs to an audience. So in order to understand the Bee Gees, you have to understand that. And everything that happened to them, good and bad, flows from that. And as you rightly say, Mark, the volume of songs and the volume of successful songs is just overwhelming. First thing that we did, Frank and I, is we went to hear a symposium in New York of the Institute of Audio Engineers, which to sounds was actually a lot more exciting than it sounds. And Albie Galutin and Richardson were speaking about engineering Saturday Night Live. We actually were just coming to the project. And at one point, Albie said, and we wrote it down and got him to say, that the Bee Gees, that he said somehow or other Barry Gibb was dialed into the collective unconscious. That's happened. And Barry is the spokesman for all 3 of them. And, you know, and you follow the sort of music albums in the 80s, albums in the 90s, even an album in 2000, and you think, he's right. There's something else going on here. And you can't point to it in his education, because he left school when he was like 9 or something. He just had it. So
yeah.
It was curious when we first started the project 3 years ago. We had a bunch of people over at the house, and they were asking what I was doing, and I said, "Well, I'm starting this project, a documentary about the Bee Gees." And they all went, "Oh, Saturday Night Fever," and everything. I said, "No. Let me do something for you." And I started to play songs that they had written, and people were just looking around. They wrote that. They wrote that. It was incredible. If you look at their body of work, it just is amazing. And so, as Nigel was saying, for them to cover this period of time, it's really their songwriting. And, you know, for any of you or any of us who have siblings, you know, you don't get along all the time with your siblings. So that was kind of natural, but they always kept coming back together because they loved each other so much, and they loved making music in this process. When you see that One Night Only in Vegas, they are loving what they are doing. They never left that stage. It's an amazing concert. And I think that's really what shows through in their story.
Yeah, you could see how much they loved what they did. In closing, though, I think, you know, since Barry, as the only surviving brother, and really, in a sense, the one narrator, and he's so poignant in this movie. And while I say that, I also think that their sense of humor has gone unnoticed too, and that's really fun in the movie that they talk about. But Barry himself and how poignant he is, and the way he looks at the world now is really a story in itself. And I presume you spent a lot of time with him. Are there any kind of closing remarks about Barry and the relationship with his brothers and their music that you'd like to share?
Well, I think it really is that he's been reflecting back on, he's the last man standing. And he really wanted to talk about, you know, how they got here and how he felt about each of his brothers. And it was an extraordinary journey for us to learn the relationships and how they all work together, and you know, the family of it all, the fact that they all moved to Miami. You know, it was a family unit. They were a family unit, and I really do feel that was what kept them going and kept them together, and become such a sad thing now when they're all gone. But Barry's just an amazing guy, and I think we were very honored to be able to tell his story.
Yeah, I just second that by saying that Barry is obviously a superstar, and he's managed to keep in touch with that side of just being ordinary. He's not ordinary in any way, but he's able to be with ordinary people and doesn't think that he is somehow better than you. Of course, in the world that he works in, he's number one. So it was really, we left completely devoted to him, I have to say, you know.
Well, Frank and Nigel, I want to thank you for, one, making this extraordinary film. I'm just so excited to be able to share it with our audience, both at the drive-in and online. And I also am very honored you're both here when, as I preface this about your careers and the amount of joy and artistry that you've given to everybody with your dozens and dozens, maybe 100 films is just a blessing for us all. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and we'll see you in person next year.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.